Carrie Hepburn here from Compass PD, and I am really excited for you to meet my colleague, David Brothers. I've known David, I don't know, probably 6, 7 years now, right, David? Worked
Yes.
together, we've known each other, he's supported me, so many things. David's been in education now 27 years. And in those 27 years, he taught middle school and high school math and science. He also taught at-risk students in an alternative high school. In those 27 years, he's been a curriculum coordinator, an assessment coordinator, the director of assessment and summer programs, and the director of curriculum and assessment. He's had all kinds of hats, and he's seen curriculum instruction and assessment from a variety of lenses, which is why I'm so excited to have David here with us today, because his passion, the thing that gets him up every day is thinking about data and assessment practices and how you can use your data and assessment practices to make data-based instructional decisions to give students hope and to give students feedback. And to be honest, that's not something that most people know well enough to understand the power and the value in this kind of work. And so I think you're going to love this conversation as much as I am today. I've got my professional notebook. I have my note-taking pens, which you've probably seen before, right, David?
Absolutely.
And we are going to talk. I know that you're going to be as blessed as I have been just listening to David talk about data and assessment practices. And so, David, I want to talk with you about, like, when we think about data and looking at data and making sense of data, making it usable, and like thinking about purposeful questions when we're studying that. Why is this important?
The simple answer is you've got to know where students are at in order to respond to their needs. And it's data, data is endless right now. We have so much data at our fingertips, and oftentimes it is just incredibly overwhelming.
Mm.
And it's, how do you look at it? How do you present it so that teachers, administrators can have really thoughtful, productive conversations around it? One of the things that I enjoy doing, crazy enough, is trying to find new ways to present data and helping others just be able to interpret it similar to the way that I would. And so really just helping them, guiding them so that they, at the end of the day, they don't need my help anymore. And they, at the end of the day, that they don't think of looking at data and doing the analysis behind it as scary.
A couple things are just sticking out to me. I do hear all of the time about how districts, how schools, how teachers have so much data that they don't do anything with it, and they're overwhelmed by it, and they don't even know how to use it. And so I think just listening to you talk about how you're able to help present it in a way that makes it usable and so that it's not scary. And I think just listening to you, just being able to hear your passion and knowing that about you, that it can be fun, and it can help you with planning and your next steps. Are those some of the things that are big goals that you have when you're working with your teachers or your districts or your principals as you're doing this work?
Yeah, absolutely. It's helping that not everything is an opportunity for improvement. Not everything is a negative. It's helping others see and find there's celebrations in the data, and we can find those. And Carrie, it's often that we don't want to, we even if we find a celebration, we actually don't dig into it like we would if we have an area of improvement. And oftentimes we really need to dig into a celebration to figure out what's going well, why did it work? And often we find a practice that we can transfer into another area.
I had to write that in all capital letters in my notebook, because you're right. We do think looking at data as a negative, and that we're looking for all of the areas of weakness, almost that deficit model thinking. And something that you introduced to me that was brand new uh, a few years ago was thinking about the growth and the
Yeah.
growth data and how that looks, and that feels empowering. It feels exciting.
So, and so just, and so it can, and that in itself can be a celebration. For the longest time, as educators, we've looked at where students are at. And we've known that certain groups of students underperform other students. And while obviously we want to get them to perform as well as everyone else, it's almost self-defeating to, as you look at that from one year to the next, and you don't see that gap closing as fast as you'd like. Another way that we can look at data is like you said, is through the lens of growth and how fast students are growing from one point in time into the next. So if we can find that through a data analysis, we identify that our students in poverty is a subgroup that we need our attention to right now, because it is the most pertinent for that subgroup based on what's going on in a school, in a district. And we start looking at their growth. And then we start noticing that we've put a lot of things in place. And then we start noticing through growth data that actually that group of students is growing faster than the average student in that data set. And that's a data point that, wow, if that continues, we're going to close that gap.
Wow.
And that's a celebration. Personal story, just really heartwarming, is oftentimes our special education teachers, as they look at students with IEP and their data, are just defeated 100% of the time. And obviously, the students with IEPs, they have deficits, they have disabilities, and so their data is always going to trend lower. And we still want to make sure those students are progressing as well. And then a lot of times when we start looking at that data from that subgroup, you can find places where not only are the students with IEPs in a group growing faster than the average student, but are actually growing much faster, or growing at almost more than 2 years of growth in a single year. And that's a celebration for IEP teachers to know that the work that they're doing is paying off. Or kind of in reverse, if we can look at growth data every 6 to 8 to 12 weeks, we can start looking at the impact our interventions are having. So if I can look across multiple schools that are using the same intervention, and we're not seeing the growth, we're not at least seeing the same growth that our average students are making, then we know that we've got to start questioning that intervention and maybe decide, is there a better intervention that we could be using? It allows us to be a lot more responsive and more timely as well.
Love that. Love that. So you're just like segueing me into the next question, which is, how does looking closely at data transform your instructional practices? How have you seen this transform instruction?
The way I have seen it transfer on, and I'll give you an example, Carrie, as following a data protocol that we have used with our EL students. We noticed that as we analyzed our WIDA access data results, our EL students were always performing much better at speaking and listening than reading and writing. And that was historical. As we started to dig into the data and started asking a lot of whys, why do we think that's happening? We realized that, gosh, when we look at what's happening in the classroom, our EL teachers are spending a lot more time proportionally on math instruction than reading and writing instruction and in those support classes. And as we said, well, why is that? Well, it's because oftentimes our EL students find success first in math and less so in reading and writing, more so in speaking and listening, but less so in reading and writing. And so as we kept asking why, it just made sense. Gosh, our students are more experiencing success. They're enjoying school. more when they're in math, and so our teachers are spending more time on it. It was
Mhm.
just an aha moment that, oh my gosh, it
Right.
absolutely makes sense why we weren't focusing on reading and writing. We were focused on this. This is what makes our teachers and students feel good,
Yeah.
and and we know we've got to do better at reading and writing. So it
Yep.
just ended up with a change in instructional practice about how we structure our EL classrooms that ended up with our EL students' performance improving.
What a great story. What a great way to just give us a concrete example about the value and the importance of looking at this data. And I think,
And
you know,
Carrie, honestly, I could not have predicted how that data conversation was going to go. I
mhm,
had, as going through lots of data protocols and lots of conversations, um, many times there's a lot of similar themes that I could not have predicted how that went, but it was truly by looking at data and asking, trying to get down to the root cause of why it was happening. And when you're authentic and real and the people in the room are trusting, you can really come down to what's the root cause and then make some thoughtful decisions on how to act on that root cause.
now, okay, I have to ask I have to go off of some of our thinking. Just when you, how do you create safe spaces for these kinds of conversations? You do this so well. That's why I'm that's why I'm pushing us a little bit deeper than I thought we might. But I think that it's just natural. How do you create a safe space where people can have these real, authentic conversations and not feel like it's an attack, a personal attack?
You've got to listen and see where the different team members are. You've got
Mhm.
to honor that. And honestly, you've got to verbalize that to them, that my point here is not to judge. This is not evaluative at all. And Carrie, I can't stress it enough. As soon as a data conversation becomes evaluative or perceived evaluative, you're not going to accomplish anything.
Mm.
And then it's really knowing how to guide teachers and administrators that are part of that team with very thoughtful questions so that it never comes across as attacking.
Mhm.
I like to phrase things like, I'm just noticing this. Why
Mhm.
do you think that? Why is that happening?
Mhm.
Uh, I keep referring back to, and at the end of the day, we want every child to succeed. And
Right.
you know, in this team and this data set we're looking at, these are all of our students,
Mhm.
all of our students.
Mm.
And even if they're not in my own personal classroom or in my own personal group, I still want them to succeed.
Yeah.
And that's what all educators want.
Yeah.
And when you can set that up, um, teachers are more apt to look at their own data more reflectively.
Mhm.
But sometimes it's hard.
Mhm. It
And
is hard.
sometimes it's you figure out if it's a very tough team, then it's a little bit slower with the data.
Mhm. Mhm.
You carefully choose a set of data that is less, I don't even know if controversial is the right word, but just so they start interacting with data how I would like them to work with data.
Mhm. I hear from you that you're doing responsive teaching based on, just like we would do with our students, you're meeting those in your group where they are and scaffolding them. So everyone's at a different space or a different time or a different level. But through your thoughtful, purposeful questions, you're able to determine like the entry point that you
Right.
can come in at and help them lift their level of conversations around data. And
And
this,
Kara, I think a little bit ago we were talking about the PLC process
mhm,
and whether it's a true PLC or not.
mhm,
It's always knowing, trying to figure out it in the moment where a team is at, and then knowing here's where I want to push them to, and I can't push too hard.
yeah, yeah,
I have to get them here first before I can get them where I want them to go.
right. The kind of the old saying that you have to go slow to go fast.
Right. Mhm.
It never helps for us to push, but to make it a safe space that we can have these risky, what feels risky conversations. What looking at data can do, thinking about PLCs, is you're thinking about all four PLC questions, like what do we want students to know? How are we going to know if they know? What are we going to do if they do? What are we going to do if they don't? Like all four, looking, you're hitting all of that through these conversations. So
Really, at the end of the day, Carrie, like you said,
yeah.
it's all about the students. And so we might set a goal, we might have a root cause, but at the end of the day, with a PLC, I want to focus back on student work, trying to
Mhm.
figure out where students are at, and then being able to be very responsive so that I can provide great feedback for each individual student that's in alignment with what we had discussed in our PLC and in our team meeting around data and how we want to improve. And
Love
then
that.
honestly, with that feedback, helping students set goals, seeing their own data, really
Mhm.
to empower students and help them know that they can do this.
Yeah. Right, right. You know, and I can hear that in your voice, that looking through this, you believe they can do this. And so we want to help our staff believe they can do this so they can go back and convey that same message to their kids. I also think looking at the data um, helps increase like content knowledge for us as educators too. The more we talk about it, the more we look at it, the more we think about it, and we think about instructional practices and maybe what we've done or somebody else has done, it helps us know what we're teaching even better.
Well, tie into some others that I know you work with, Carrie, is let's say that we're looking at benchmark assessments that are tied to standards. Then it
Mhm.
becomes so critical to know deeply what an individual standard is saying. If you notice that a standard needs focus and need to focus right now, understanding that standard deeply
Mhm.
it is so important. And so that groundwork has to be there as well.
It does. It does. I could like I literally could sit here, we could talk for hours about this. I totally know that because it's so good. It's so good. So when you think about studying and analyzing the data and making sense of it, how does this impact students? How does this work that educators are doing trickle down and impact our kids?
It's because our teachers best know their students. And so they can say, we're going to focus on trying to improve work on X, Y, or Z standard.
Hmm.
They're the ones that know their students and can help students understand where they're at around that standard and where their next steps are going to go.
Hmm.
Um, Probably not for today, but I can go on and on and on about a learning scale, a proficiency scale,
Uh-huh.
and as a tool to help not only teachers know where a student's at, but a tool that allows a teacher to show a student you're not quite at mastery yet, but look at all the things you can do and look at just these few things that you need to do that we'll work on together and we'll
Hmm.
get you the mastery.
Hmm.
And it all starts by having that broader conversation around the data that ends up with some very actionable steps that teachers can take for individual students. Again, going back to those four PLC questions, what am I going to do to a student if they're not getting it?
Hmm.
And that includes down to the individual student level, or what am I going to do if they are getting it, that they're beyond mastery? What am I going to do to continue on their learning so that they're not just sitting in a holding pattern? We
Right,
want them to grow as well.
right, right. So I think about Hattie's visible learning is what's kind of coming to my mind right now. And so um, teacher clarity has a high effect size. When I think about, for those who are listening, like John Hattie, 0.4 would be a year's worth of growth. Teacher clarity, I don't know exactly what the effect size is. That one might be 0.79, where feedback is 0.74. So looking at data like this and having these conversations in our PLCs, the learning scales or proficiency scales, is that what I call it? So that's I learned all about those from David. So and he's the expert in that. That would not be me, but how to develop those would be really, I can see how on Hattie's effect size this kind of work is really going to catapult student learning. Now when I think about Hattie's effect size regarding kids being able to grade themselves and determine their next steps, that's like an effect size of 1.44. Can they use like the learning scales or the proficiency scales for that work? Do students use that?
They definitely can. And
Okay.
that's part of something that we can model with students is, and a teacher can model for them. Here's how you can rate yourself. Here's how you can highlight these things that you know that you're doing.
Mm,
And Carrie, honestly, if we have really good formative assessments and summative assessments that we're doing that are very actionable and well written,
mhm,
our students will be able to know what they're able to do, and we'll be able to do that. And so that just highlights if you have really good assessment practices,
mhm.
um, your data and your response to it can even be better with the student response.
And you can just see how powerful it is, how powerful when it's done purposefully, intentionally, in a safe space, how we can really make decisions that impact kids in a positive way, in a really positive way. If someone's new to all of this, what would be some tips or recommendations you would give to them for starting out?
You can't do it all at once.
Ah,
Pick something. If it's on data, pick one place, one data set to start that you're interested in.
mm-hmm,
Try and figure out as deeply as you can what you think the data is telling you, and then start asking yourself why. There's a 5 why protocol that's really super powerful, and it simply is the data is telling me that my students that are on IEPs are not performing as well with problem solving as my students with non-IEPs.
mm-hmm.
And then just start asking why. Why do we think that's the case?
Wow.
It might lead into a discussion of, well, many times our students with IEPs are pulled from tier 1 instruction once that direct instruction with the classroom teacher is done. And they don't have time to interact with problems in a pure manner with their peers.
Mm-hmm.
But really just at a minimum, trying out with those 5 whys. Why do you think that's the case? And then not being satisfied with it and doing something with it.
Oh.
And always don't write down what you can't control. If you're trying to figure out a root cause, if it's something you can't control, you're just going to spin your wheels.
Mm-hmm.
You know what, Carrie? I know that I have a number of students that, as hard as I want them to, will never go home and read a book. So I can't write that down.
Right.
I know that many of our secondary students will never go home and do homework.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to write that down.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to do is think about what I can control.
Yeah.
And so that 5 whys is really a great way to start thinking about data.
Mm. I love that thinking though about what can I control, and that no longer can I think about those things outside of my like sphere of influence or sphere of ability to control, however people like to think about that, because I know as an educator I always went there.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I would know like, well, they should be doing volume reading or practicing their math facts at night, which I think is not good. So please don't do that. If you're listening right now. I was old school. Like back in the day, we used to do that. I'm not a math person. So if you know me, I'm not a math person. That's why David's here. But you know, I could look at that. I would look at that personally and say, well, we've been doing all of these things in the classroom, and there's something that needs to happen outside of here too, and they're not doing that, and so that's not why I can see the power in that, not me not being able to do that, and that take that off the plate because this is our current reality.
And then honestly, Carrie, that oftentimes leads to really outside the box thinking on
Mm,
how to help kids.
mm-hmm.
When we put these buffers up, if you will, I
Yeah.
can't think about that. I can't think about that. So that's when you get those unique, novel ideas.
It You're right. You're right. It really does. Those barriers or obstacles do help bring out the best in us, I think. I think about a few years ago being asked, like, flat out, if I thought students in my district had like summer slide. They used to call it summer slide. Not every I don't we use that term anymore, but at that time, summer slide. And I said, oh yeah, they do, because I know at the end of the year this is where we are as readers. I know when we come back, we slide back. And the person said, well, what are you going to do about it? If you know it's happening, then why are you letting it happen? Like, what is your plan to, like, this is an obstacle. You have to think through this. What are some things that you need to do to set kids up for success, that they don't have, that doesn't have to be a problem anymore? And so, as you're saying that, that's just reminding me of sometimes being called to the carpet. Like, so what are you going to do about it? There's nothing we can do about these barriers or obstacles, and it's up to us to figure out how to work around that. So,
And we will always have a lot of smart people around the table helping with those conversations. And that's the exciting part.
yeah, we don't have to be alone in this work. And I think that would probably, I think that's a tip too, is don't try to tackle it all by yourself. Find a buddy or a friend. If you don't have, a PLC or a team, try to find somebody that you can study student work together, and look at that. So David, I just want to say thank you. This was so amazing for me. I have like 3 pages worth of notes just from our conversation, and I've gotten to work with you for years, so I know what a blessing it's going to be for so many other people. So I want to let the listeners know that if you're interested in learning more about how to look at data and how to study it in a way that it makes sense, in ways that makes data usable, and thinking about purposeful questions, creating safe spaces and environments, a couple things will be coming up. So keep an eye on our website and make sure you're on our email list and on our social media. David will be leading some workshops, possibly some boot camps, and he is happy to come help you and your district make sense of the data. So those of you listening, have a great day.